So, Nick Bateman, Executive Chairman at GrowPura, thank you so much for joining me on the Vertical Farming Podcast.
Thank you.
For the benefit of the listener, where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from the United Kingdom,
Okay.
in the north of England.
And were you born and raised there?
No, I was born in the Midlands and have moved around the UK a lot. I've worked over in the USA for a period, and we founded the company back in 2012. And then in those days, it was based in Cornwall in England. It's now relocated to Bedford in the middle of the UK.
What part of the US did you spend some time in?
I worked in Houston in Texas,
Okay.
and also in Wilmington in Delaware.
Okay. Two completely different states with completely different culture.
Oh well, I worked for the same company. I worked for ICI Americas,
Okay.
and their headquarters are Wilmington, and we weren't actually working in the oil industry. So why we ended up in Houston, I'm not entirely sure, but we were based on dealing with software to help improve energy performance of business.
Okay. Was there any culture shock when you first arrived here in the States?
I actually liked the culture in Texas. I thought that was really good.
Okay.
And it was a bit more staid in Wilmington, you understand.
Yeah.
But Texas was a really open community. It was really good doing business down there.
Yeah. For most of your career, if people were to ask you what you thought you'd be working in when you left university and what the majority of your career has been like prior to working in the ag tech space, what would you say most of your career has been spent in?
Most of my career has been spent in high-tech business, probably from 1985 to date, which is quite a long time, and with a period both in life sciences and in food, different experiences in food. When I started in the financial world in banking, and when I started, I thought I would have stayed in banking, but I found industry more challenging, more interesting. And I ended up working for ICI and then AstraZeneca, and working on the biotech side. And the biotech side has influenced how I've thought about vertical farming in particular. So when I came across vertical farming back in 2011, I thought that it would be a great opportunity to make a big impact on the issue of population growth and issues of the ability to provide the right amount of food, the right quality of food to people. All of that has changed since that time. And so that's what we started out thinking about, and we decided to develop our own technology. And then with my background in bioscience, I thought, well, plants can actually be more helpful in the world than just provide food. So very interested in using plants in the medical, healthcare, cosmetics, nutraceuticals types of activity. And so we've developed technology that enables us to do those wide variety of things. And the background when I worked in ICI and AstraZeneca, we had a business which we worked on, and I worked on for over 10 years, which is a food product called corn, which is made by continuous sterile fermentation. And this is effectively about a clean growing activity. And so when I started work in GrowPura, or founded GrowPura, shortly after getting involved in that sector, I realized that this was not the cleanest sector I've ever come across. And certainly soil is not clean. And growing hydroponically, which isn't grown in soil, helps enormously, but you still need to actually protect against pests, flying pests and ground pests and all sorts of things. And so we decided early on that we would develop a technology based on clean room technology. And then we realized that clean room technology helps you in terms of most food products that are eaten raw need to be often washed in things like chlorine,
Yeah.
which is not a nice chemical. And so we decided to set up a clean room facility. And I think that the costs of a clean room facility, because you avoid the need to use chlorine washing and other methods for food products, some food products, not all food products, then that has actually proved beneficial, because if you have to wash things in a chlorine bath of some kind, and then you have to dry the product, and you dry it by spinning it at an incredible pace, a lot faster than a salad spinner that we do at home. When you do that, it makes an enormous impact on the shelf life of the product because you're damaging the leaf, and
Yeah.
so the shelf life of these products is actually quite small. And so people have tried to avoid that problem by selling product unwashed. You must wash before use. The only problem with that kind of approach is that most of us don't read everything that's said on the label.
Correct.
When you open the bag, it looks as if it's the kind of thing you just throw on the plate and you eat it. And because that isn't clean, you could end up with a nasty, well, you could die if you're really unlucky, but you could end up with a nasty stomach upset or something like that. And so our approach ends up with a much longer shelf life, people, and it gives you the confidence to produce these other products I mentioned earlier, like things to do with the pharmaceutical industry, whether it be vaccines or other technology. So that's what we're about.
So, Nick, when you got started in with GrowPura in 2011, you said I think was when you first was seeing everything that was happening in the vertical farming space. Given that I've been involved in the industry for about 3 years now, but it's really early days, and I'm wondering what it is that you saw or what it is that interested you about moving into what I imagine was an unproven technology with a lot of variables. You've been in enough cycles to see dot-com boosts, tech boosts, finance ups and downs, and so you've had that experience also to be able to discern what is a trend, what is a fad, or what is something that's going to have stability and what's going to have legs. So I'm curious, because of your extensive experience in industry, what you saw specifically about vertical farming that attracted you and had you feel like this was an important opportunity.
So I think it was the scale. So food is a phenomenally large industry worldwide. And the fact that this problem is one that, the world population is going to grow by roughly 2 billion to 10 billion by 2050 or thereabouts. And these are not my numbers, but other people say that the growth in food required to be grown is going to increase by 56%. I then concluded that actually, if you're going to increase the demand to that extent, you will eventually end up with food having a better price structure. That's what I thought at the time, a better price structure than it does at present, which is very commodity based. And it's always great. So saw a very, very large market opportunity and felt that the existing businesses, the existing farmers, growers, whatever, they can't increase production to that extent. So that's what I saw, and that's why, because I thought it was a growth industry, because I thought the price cost dynamics would improve. I thought that technology like vertical farming would have more stable costs, wouldn't be subject to the vagaries that you have with outdoor growing, which is you have so many good years, so many bad years. And actually, in today's world, the number of good years is reducing in comparison to the number of bad years.
Yeah.
And so I think vertical farming is definitely really important. But I probably underestimated the technical challenge. I came from high tech industries. I worked in software on drug discovery and in the life sciences sector. And there, the technologies would appear to be a lot more complicated than growing food, growing lettuces or kale or kohlrabi or whatever. So I underestimated the fact that the industry we were moving into was one where they were not used to all these particular elements. And it
Mm-hmm.
is putting all these elements together that is novel. And so we work closely with large world renowned partners, for example, Siemens.
Yeah.
And we found out that a lot of companies around the world are fantastic at what they do, but they're not all used to having to deal with automation and a growing food crop. This is, when you have a factory and you send your bottle of milk down the factory, it comes in on day X, and the same day you process it, and it's on your and my table the next day. This is fast process. When you're growing something and it takes a number of days, weeks to get to fruition, then you've got a very different challenge in terms of forecasting and predicting. However, the predictability and forecastability of vertical farming is something that is really valuable for the end customer. I'm not talking about the consumer, but the retailer and the
Yeah.
caterer and the manufacturer. These things, people want certainty in this world. It's uncertainty that makes business really difficult, and vertical farming has a big benefit there. And I would say our technology is exceptionally good at that because of the flexibility we provide.
When you first got started, did you have a co-founder or did you found the company yourself?
No, with the three of us. There were three of us. So I was introduced to it by a guy whose career had been in horticulture, providing horticultural services. And he introduced me to vertical farming. And we decided we'd go into that. And I would, with my background, I would provide the ability to raise money to get the venture off the ground. And then we realised we needed an engineer on the team, and so we ended up with three of us: an engineer, my horticultural friend, and myself. And we worked together. Those guys worked with our first facility, which was based in Cornwall, and we were testing out a range of things. We were testing out growing 365 days a year in using natural sunlight only, and using a different form of building material, and that proved extremely successful. And we sampled our products into many large organizations, and amazingly, we got 100% response, and we were seen by 100% of the companies. So our system is based on conveying, and we used at the start point, we used a particular form of conveying, and the engineer friend had designed that. And then, unfortunately, there was a problem with the conveying system. And at that point, I then introduced a trade investor, and we decided to move to different premises and introduce different conveying technology, which we developed and enhanced, which is the basis of our current patents. And
what was the driver for making that change?
The driver making the change was, if you're working in a small team, you've got to actually all be pushing and driving at the same speed. And, these things are difficult. Was there a falling out? No, I don't think it was a falling out, but I knew that the business needed to raise more money in order to succeed. And the only way we would raise money was by taking a different stance. So we took on board a horticulturalist, plant scientist of some renown, and she and I then worked actively in the company, and the other two founders effectively retired. And we set up a new facility, again in Cornwall, which used a dark building as opposed to and used artificial light, where we tested out a different form of conveying technology. And then we carried on developing the conveying technology with some of our partners. And that's what we've learned, is that many people went into vertical farming, and my perception was that a lot of people thought it was really straightforward technology. You end up with a static system with trays, with lights, with trays, with lights, and this is really easy. I don't need a horticulturalist. It's absolutely straightforward. It's not quite as easy as that, actually.
Yeah.
And so we started with the horticultural side, and then we brought in the automation and the sophistication.
Okay.
And I believe that has helped us enormously in making sure that actually it is looking after the plant. The plants will end up with the best product, and we've got to make the technology help mimic nature and help them succeed. And yes, of course, you can play different themes on nature, because what we now really want is seeds, strains of seeds that work best within the vertical farming environment. One of the early issues we found was that most of the seed companies locally only thought about the UK environment and climate. And actually, it doesn't matter what the UK climate's like. We should think worldwide and think of all those different species. And that is, that's really been helpful in our formation of our future plans. So we're not a vertical farmer. So I don't know whether you realise that. So we're a technology company developing technology so that people can grow a wider variety of plants for a wider variety of situations And we're continually developing technology, making it more automated, making it more versatile, and making it more, well, the flexibility of the system is enormous. So we run our system so that we save enormous amounts of money, operating money on infrastructure. And we do that by moving the plants to the watering station. And in fact, we do have a bedroom. So we send the plants to a bedroom. And the bedroom means that we can run where the lights are sat, we can run the lights 24 hours a day. So that means we save a third of the light fixtures just by having a bedroom. We also have proven that we can actually run with less lights than a static system, approximately half the number of lights. So effectively, we end up with only a third of the light fixtures that a static system would use. So you can see that would have enormous impact in terms of the energy cost and the
Yeah.
capital cost of the system. And so these are the kind of things we're continually thinking about, how we can make the system different and more beneficial to the grower.
Where are you seeing the most improvements technology wise? Having been in the space for such a long period of time, there's been improvements in LEDs, energy efficiency. A lot of companies are helping specifically with that task. But from your perspective, in terms of where you see the most benefit on a day-to-day basis in terms of how it helps your operations, what has you most excited about technologies that have improved since you started?
Well, I mean, you're right, aren't you? You're right. LEDs has been the improvement in LEDs and energy efficiency fantastic. I think the big thing from I think now is the artificial intelligence, so that you can learn more and operate the facilities better. I think the second area is the robotics for picking and harvesting crop and automating the whole process. So I think those are the two areas. I think the area that probably will give the longest benefit long term will be to do with seed selection and genetic selection and gene editing of the seed to enable you to deliver different products. And I think the food side of vertical farming is enormous, because food is enormous.
Yeah.
And we've got to solve the food crisis around the world, that lots of the world, the soil is being eroded or turning into desert. And this is going to make, and the climates are becoming less acceptable. And so this is going to make people want to move to more acceptable climates. And we're not talking about the odd million of people, we're talking about tens of millions of people are going to want to migrate. So we've got to find a way of growing food close to where people need to live in a great environment, and using the water, saving the water, which is a big issue. So I think the other thing then is working on how clever the technology can be, enabling people to grow vaccines via plants and other plant production, using plants as a factory to
Yeah.
produce the crops of the highest, the extracts of the crops of the highest quality. And so, but I think we've got the seed side, the robotic side, and the artificial intelligence, I think, is the next generation.
So you mentioned crops. What was your crop selection when you started, and how has that evolved over time? You did mention plant science, obviously interest from pharma, horticulture. Where have you seen the migration and the evolution in terms of crop selection for indoor farming?
I think people have been looking for the highest margin crops, and
Mm.
those quite clearly are leafy greens and herbs. I think that it is highly possible to make attractive returns from many other crops, and people are looking at things, fruits, strawberries, high volume crops. I think that consumers are more demanding now than they were, and they're more selective about the crops. So traditionally, you'd think in terms of simple crops, like they're not simple at all, but lettuce, tomato, cucumber, peppers. These are obvious big volume salad crops, but people do actually require more variety, and vertical farming is really suited to doing runs of crops like that. And there are crops with major challenges. Tall crops are a challenge. You need to end up with encouraging them to grow smaller and be more productive smaller. But there are tons of different things going on in the world that make you think about testing out how you can use vertical farming to help with some of the other challenges. So, a simple challenge might be that grape farmers around the world and wine growers are having enormous problems over the quality of their crop and the predictability and all sorts of different things that they are working on. And I think if you're a grower, you think about the world differently than a vertical farmer would be. And so if you think on a macro scale about how you can go about these things, then you can suddenly start to see how you can make enormous savings. So the losses that people make in traditional growing are enormous. And in fact, in fruit and vegetables, the losses are something like 45% of all fruit and vegetable.
I've heard it as high as 70% for some crops as
Oh,
well.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
I'm sure it is, yeah. And so if you can end up with a process where you can cut those losses and you can provide other benefits like you're providing crops where they're needed. We don't all want to transfer goods all around the world all the time. Globalization has been really important, but we've all learned lots of lessons from globalization, especially now. And people need to worry about food security and drug security and all these crops. To be dependent upon your particular chips from China or maybe some specialist
Yeah.
equipment from Ukraine. This is not a safe way of going about it. You really need much more common range of sources of supply, and vertical farming can give you that because you're not dependent upon the weather. So you're making that dramatic change. And the resources you use, apart from electricity, they're not phenomenally significant. So electricity is a big challenge. Depends where you are in
Yeah.
the world. In America, it's less of a problem than in the UK. But renewable energy. If you can find a way of picking up sources of renewable energy, then this makes the process much more acceptable. And I think a lot of farmers who haven't got the dynamics that we've talked about, GrowPura, a lot of farmers then are starting to flex their business around energy pricing, etc., etc.
Mm.
And I think you've got to really work harder at finding a solution that enables you to use the energy all day and all night because the capital cost of the facilities are so large.
Yeah. Where are you seeing the most promise, or what has you most excited in terms of new developments or interest from other businesses or industries in what's possible, and maybe where they would traditionally look towards open farming or maybe greenhouses, they're maybe starting to look more at the possibilities of what's available with vertical farming and indoor farming?
So I think large corporations are all thinking about global changes. And I've spoken at a number of events, and some of the events you listen to talking about energy saving or energy benefit, and you listen to people who are talking about much smaller benefit. I can make a 5% improvement. Absolutely worthwhile having, and you must do that. But then you think about vertical farming, where you can make a dramatic change for some things, not everything. The challenge is to make it more usable for more crops. And then you suddenly start to realize that the larger companies in the world have time to think and the resources to think about how they can impact on the environment. And so they are all starting to think about vertical farming is an opportunity for them because traditional industry is not necessarily going to be the way of the future. And so tons of companies are investing money in funds to invest in businesses in vertical farming. They want to keep an interest in what's going on and to see what their company can do. And so we've had a number of major corporations visit us and look at our facility, and they have gone away and then said, yes, we would like to work with you in this field. And that is extremely encouraging. And yeah, I think that's probably all I can say about that, Harry.
For folks that are new to GrowPura, how would you explain the current business model, who a typical client is, who your partners are, and how, if at all, that has transitioned from the time you started the company?
That's a big question. So I think I would say that we see our customers as being people who have land or energy and want to make a better return from their land and energy. Existing vertical farmers, especially people who are existing food processors and packers, because we can do the whole thing in one unit.
Yeah.
And so they should be thinking about that to avoid their chlorine washes and all the other processes and the numerous transport that they use. I think that so when we started, we thought we would have interesting technology and we would be a grower. And then it became clear to us that actually the challenge of continually developing technology meant that the only way you could make that a sustainable business and an economic business for us was to widen our customers. And the capital cost of keep putting up vertical farms one after the other is a lot of cash. And so we didn't want to go down that route, and we watched other parties go down that route. And so we wanted to spend time extending the range. So we would now turn ourselves into what we would describe as a turnkey solutions provider. Yes, we will also do research for people and consultancy and train people on how to operate a vertical farm. So we do all those range of good consulting things, but we will work with world global partners to deliver turnkey solutions, and we will be developing the artificial intelligence and the software to improve the control of the system. So, as in that sense, it's probably a much more sophisticated and requires a lot more process control than many other systems, where people are looking at static systems where they need to see what's going on the static trays and then physically move them and about. And this is a much more controllable process, but you've got to give the instruction as to when to move things to location A or B. So we have changed, and we've seen the benefit of being able to think expansively about the range of products and not just be focused. So the change has been one that we now want to be a global company. We're talking to people around the world. We've patented our technology in North America. We're approved in Canada, waiting on America, Singapore, India, Europe, the UK, Australia. And what people need in these different countries are very different. The partners we've developed, I mentioned partners like Siemens. We are working with some international automation stroke integration companies, also working with a number of LED lighting companies. And we would like to influence some of these companies in their thinking of the products that they're developing, which would be more beneficial to the climate, to the world, if they use GrowPura technology. And so that's our challenge, is to persuade other companies to recognize the significant cash and capital benefits of our technology and the energy benefits. And therefore, they start to develop around that technology and work with us to aggressively implement this technology around the world for the wide variety of products that are required from this technology. I mean, if you take a piece of data which says if you could grow all the crops that were possible in the world, you'd solve the food problem easily, because you'd only need less than 1% of the current world's growing earth land. You'd only need less than 1%. Of course, we can't grow all those crops, and they're not always cost effective. So we've got to widen that band. But I think what it starts to do is it starts to make people think about how you use the land in the world, and how, considering a world where we've chopped down all the trees for some reason, and now we want to replant all the trees. And unfortunately, trees don't grow quickly, do they? And so the speed at which you can make an impact is incredibly slow. And so, how we use the land is is it leisure, or is it housing, or is it commercial? What do we do with the world, and how do we preserve it for the future? Because if people think that the climate change is, you talk about 1.5% degrees C and these impacts. Of course, these impacts, that's the average, and it doesn't deal with the ups and downs and the extreme weathers that we get. And, when you're thinking about the temperatures and I'm sure the USA has temperatures in it much more in excess of this, but you think of Spain hitting 30 degrees C plus in April, what do people think the temperatures are going to be like in July and August?
Yeah.
And who wants to live in those temperatures in July and August? And of course, if you've got air conditioning and all that, that's fantastic. But if you haven't got the energy, air conditioning doesn't kind of work. So, yeah, the world's going to have to change. And vertical farming does have to get over some problems because it'd be crass to think that vertical farming was the panacea. It'd be crass to think that vertical farming companies haven't had significant challenges, and they have. And a number of companies have suffered enormously.
Yeah.
And we would say if they had taken a slower approach, because we've taken a slow approach and thought more about the technology and what you're trying to achieve rather than thinking it's simplistic, then maybe the problems would not have been as extreme as they were. Every time we looked at the approach, we were looking and we recognized a number of things. First of all, that you needed to develop technology that was capital efficient. So we were looking at sweating all the assets. We also recognized that to make food affordable, that you need to do it at volume. So if a traditional grows and they send the product to somebody else to deal with, all they have to do is harvest it. Once you've got a building where you're harvesting it and you might as well pack it and you might as well distribute it, you've got to be doing it at volume. And if you don't do it at volume, you're giving away a significant margin to somebody else in the game. And you don't control the end customer. And so that's why we always thought about high volume in intensification. And we always recognized that it was the packing and which needed space, and the dynamics are very different to the growing area. And so that's where we're at.
How has your vision for what was needed for the company, the skill sets you've had to call to bear as a CEO, how has that changed as you've watched the industry change, as you've gained experience about the industry over the past 10 years or so?
I think that the commercial challenges because we've changed from being a grower into a technology solutions provider, but the commercial challenges are quite significant. I think people used to tell me that vertical farmers didn't understand retailers, and therefore they'd rather deal with somebody who was an existing provider. And that probably influenced our thinking into going into becoming a technology solutions provider. I think that, we recognised that we needed to develop different kind of horticulturalists, because whilst understanding how plants grow in existing technologies, this is new technology, and getting people to get their mind around the new technology, this is a big challenge. And so finding the right people is key. I think the one thing I've been delighted with is the fact that most of the partner companies that we talk to actually really love the technology and they want to be involved. So we have people who've worked for technology partners who have, for whatever reason, moved on to new roles, and they still want to maintain the relationship with GrowPura. And they obviously are intelligent people, and they've obviously looked at vertical farming in other parts of the world. And so they obviously recognize there's some difference. And in one of our partners has told us that we're in their partners who've invested in vertical farming, and tens of millions, not 50p. And they've told us that we're at least 2 years ahead of the other vertical farming technology companies that they have looked at. And so in our approach to the next generation from today's offering, people can already see why we're thinking like that and why we're moving forward in that particular way. Because the challenge is, it's a big challenge. This industry is going to be a large industry and is going to, despite short setbacks in some companies, it is going to accelerate away. It will, without a doubt. And more countries around the world are getting interested. America, Canada were probably the first leaders, and the UK was, one of the things I would say is the UK, I think we were one of the first companies to be formed in the UK focusing on vertical farming. And we've got our own approach, and we can demonstrate how successful it is, both in use of foot space, so we can get more intensity in terms of trays or tray areas in a physical footprint than other technologies. And that, of course, makes the overall, the external building costs significantly cheaper. And we have this, I've explained the environmental, the energy saving. And we also, with the automation, we have other operational savings in terms of labour. So
Yeah.
it's quite a compelling technology.
What's a tough question you've had to ask yourself recently?
What a tough question. Oh, well, probably many tough questions. It's you've got to be thinking about where the future lies and what are the products, what should we develop? And yeah, I think that's a difficult question. I think the second thing is to think about the funding backers for the business and getting the right funding backers for the business in order to take the business to the next stage. And yeah, people are always the most important thing, aren't they? It's developing the
Yeah.
people, it's selecting the right people, and encouraging the right relationship with suppliers and customers, and basically demonstrating our care about the world and the planet. Better for people, better for the planet.
Yeah.
These are the kind of things that one must do in a company.
You mentioned finding not only backers for these endeavors, but also you did mention right funding backers. So I'm curious how you think about who is ideal when you start to think about partnering. Most people will just chase any money regardless of the source, but I think in your experience you found that's probably not the best solution. So I'm curious, given your experience in not only this industry, other industries, why it's important to partner with the right folks for when it comes to funding.
Well, I think it's clear that if you're a financial backer, you have different interests. So at some time you want to take your money and run, possibly, and it depends what that time frame is. If someone wanted to make a quick buck in a year, then that would be a real difficulty. So you wanted people who have an interest in the sector you're in and the reason for being in that sector, the rationale for being in that sector. I think as a company, we would like to probably at some point go onto a public market because we want to make sure that we manage to preserve the entity in the longer term. And so we would be looking for debt investors where it's quite clear how you repay the debt, and equity investors who share that vision. And if they share that vision, then they can help you to get to the point where you can actually float the company, whether on the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, or London Stock Exchange, wherever. And yeah, they can make their return at whatever stage they want to. And rather than the company being pushed and forced into one activity or another. I think the other thing is to make sure that you're not pressurized by the wrong dynamic. So
Yeah.
selecting those people, I think, is quite important. But you're right, it's always a balance, isn't it? You always need the money. And what we're interested in is developing a range of funding partners for our customers,
Okay.
because quite clearly, this is a really, really interesting area where you can help people go into this industry, which has a high capital cost barrier. And if you can find a solution based on the confidence in the returns they can make, whether it be using long-term money like pension funds to help people set up their farms, using a reputable technology which is proven, this would be a really good way forward for people.
Yeah, so many variables to think about. It's so interesting to see how the industry's been developing. So, as we wrap up, I'm curious what your take has been on the overall industry, having been in the space early, seeing a lot of the folks entering the space, seeing folks raise a lot of money, not succeed, ups and downs, and excitement building around the industry. I'm curious about your take.
I think it's probably been like many early stage businesses. I think I have been surprised by the number of people who were trying to work out how you can make this industry sustainable. One of the things we decided early on, and we could have gone down this track, was we decided early on not to end up supplying lots of restaurants. We could get a higher price because they'd have niche products and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the reason we didn't do that was because you got on a treadmill, and the treadmill is a difficult treadmill to get off. So you end up with lots of people who need lots of expensive distribution. And there are other people who are better able to deal with that than people like ourselves. So we would rather sell to a distributor of many vegetables and salad products and things like that, rather than doing that company that for ourselves and all the other issues. So yes, I was surprised by the way people went about it, and I was surprised at how long it took for people to work out that you needed to do it at scale in order to have a sustainable model. And when I started out, the gimmicky solutions around the world were unbelievable. And yes, marketing, loved these sort of the skyscraper triangle and growing hundreds of feet high. Well,
Sure.
obviously, this is not sensible and not practical. These are relatively low value products. It's not like producing a car. So you can't have all these bells and whistles. You've got to be sensible. You're trying to produce food at an acceptable price. And so, yeah, I think I was surprised by that. And I suppose, also surprised by the ease at which some companies manage to raise phenomenal amounts of money
Yeah.
and then, yes, make some serious errors of judgment. And probably on the other side, people would say we were probably too rational. And I think probably we were too rational and we should have been more flamboyant. But we are certainly going to be flamboyant now, I can tell you that.
Well, slow and steady definitely seems to be winning the race, from what I've seen so far. So I applaud all your early entry and enthusiasm in this space. It's been almost like a bit of a history lesson in vertical farming, this conversation. So I know our listeners are really going to get a lot out of it. So I appreciate you taking the time. And I'm just as excited for you for what the potential is for this industry and where we're headed. And I think hopefully sensible heads will prevail, making sensible decisions. So the website is growpura.com. Anywhere else you'd like to send folks to get more connected with you and or the company?
Well, we're obviously on Instagram and we used LinkedIn. So, yes, look at the social media, and we're trying to do more speaking engagements around the world so that people can hear about us, etc. We'd love to work with more universities in terms of getting them to adopt our technology in order for younger people starting out to see how this can help them in their studies and development of further technology, which may be a benefit to us as well in terms of new product ideas and things you can do with plants.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And your team has provided all those links. We'll make sure all those links are available in the show notes as well. So if you're listening to this, you'll be able to just look in your podcast player and click on those. I really appreciate you taking the time, Nick, and I'm glad your team was able to coordinate this for us.
Thank you very much indeed. Very kind of you.